the main point we want to dig into here is we are all different. Hindi lang sa panglabas na anyo, yung pagkakaiba natin, we are also different when it comes to our preferences, when it comes to how we like our hair, what food we like, where we like to vacation. So there are many, many dimensions that make us different and unique. The thing is, it's scary to be different, right? Like if you feel like you're not part of the group, it's not a comfortable feeling. There are experiments they've done on this actually, and it turns out that it's pretty much a lot of humans who feel that way when they are different. This is a recreation of a very, very famous psych experiment. So in 1955, I think was the year, there was this psychologist who wanted to find out if you are in an elevator, for example. Di ba sa elevator, usually, pagpasok natin, nakaharap tayo dun sa pinto kasi dun tayo lalabas. But what they tried here is, what if everyone faced the back of the elevator? So yung mga kasabwat ng researcher, tumalikod sila, okay? And then this lady here, if you can see, siya yung participant. So what happened was, the lady faced the back of the elevator. So ginaya niya yung mga kasabwat ng researcher. This phenomenon is something that we call conformity, because when we are different from other people, it's not a comfortable feeling, and that leads us to conform or to copy other people. The interesting thing about this is it happens not just in terms of behaviors, gaya nung sa elevator. It also happens in terms of beliefs. Sometimes when we are in a group and people believe differently from us, we tend to copy their beliefs also. So I think that's a very telling thing that shows us na minsan hindi natin kaya yung discomfort of being different from everyone else. This is what we are going to dig into in our first session today. Some of the questions we will try to answer are, why do we see differences so easily? Why does it feel uncomfortable to be different? And of course, we have to ask ourselves, what do I need to know to start working towards inclusion? These are the questions that we will go through today. All right, so I have another question for all of you to type in the chat. What animal do you see? All right, so I think it's a toss-up, right? It's pretty much equal rabbit and duck. And the thing is, you're both correct. It's a rabbit, and at the same time, it's a duck. And so even with a super simple picture like this, we can see that we have very different perspectives that we see. This drives the point that we see the world differently, which means we have different understandings of the world that we see. It could be that we are all living in the same earth, in the same world, but the lenses within which we view that world are very different from each other. This brings us to concept of the day number 1. We have 5 concepts that we will learn in the first hour of our session. So our concept number 1 is unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is a quick and often inaccurate judgment based on limited facts and our own life experiences. The thing about unconscious bias is it often leads to an unearned advantage or unearned disadvantage. This means that maybe it's not intentional, but we start associating good or bad things depending on a bias. What if you are in a classroom and then someone talks and they can't speak in quote-unquote straight English? So ano yung usual na impression natin kapag ganon yung isang tao, di ba? In that moment that we judged that person, we started giving them an unearned disadvantage. We never know, right? Maybe they're actually really smart, but English is not the most comfortable language for them. And so even before we give that person a chance, we maybe already judged them. Unconscious bias is something that it could lead to those unearned advantages or disadvantages. The thing with unconscious bias is these come from sources that we may not have intentionally digested. What does this mean? Ibig sabihin lang nito, minsan hindi natin alam or talagang hindi natin inaral yung mga bagay na to. Lumaki lang tayo na ito yung nakikita natin. Sometimes we don't even know that we are learning all of these unconscious biases. So something to think about is we all have unconscious biases. What might happen if our unconscious biases are kept unchecked? I'll give you an example from an experiment, okay? So think about this. Imagine that you're playing pass the ball with other people. And then after a while, imagine that they stop giving the ball to you. How might you feel, right? So no need to tell me in the chat, but think about it. How might you feel if people stop passing the ball to you? This is something that they did in an experiment. So sa UCLA, so in the US, this is a university in the US, there's a researcher there named Naomi Eisenberger. So what she did was she hooked up the participants to an fMRI, and while the person is hooked up in the machine, they played pass the ball virtually. So the participant would play pass the ball, and then after a while, the participant stops getting the ball. What the researcher found was when this happens, the areas of the brain that would light up for the participant are the same areas of the brain that light up when we are in physical pain. And then when she would ask the participant, how did you feel when they stopped giving you the ball? The participant would start saying, it felt meaningless, or I felt excluded. I felt like they didn't need me anymore and I was useless. That very simple experiment led someone to feel like they are meaningless and not part of the team. So the lesson here is social pain hurts just like physical pain. When we feel excluded, when we feel like we don't belong, it can feel unsafe. We don't want that to happen. But if we leave our unconscious biases unchecked, that could be something that we could cause for other people. And so what do? And that's why as we grow up and as we learn more, we have to start putting on our glasses. Our glasses will be your growth mindset. We have to apply a growth mindset to the world around us. So what is growth mindset? Let's go to concept of the day number 2. Growth mindset is the belief that one's skills, talents, and capabilities can improve over time. This was coined by Carol Dweck, and usually the concept of growth mindset is used in education. The interesting thing about growth mindset, though, is it's not something that stops with school or your talents. We can also apply a growth mindset as we navigate a diverse world. So now what is diversity, right? We've talked about a diverse world. So let's go into concept number 3. Diversity simply means there's a mix. So you have differences in gender, ethnicity, ability, sexual orientation, faith, age, weight, etc. The goal of diversity is to be able to say that your population outside of your team or your company is reflected inside. When we have diversity, it means that there are people with differences and it reflects the wider population. What's interesting about diversity is without inclusion, it can lead to silos. Inclusion is how diversity plays out and is managed. It's about how people feel included and part of something. Diversity simply means there are different people in the mix. Inclusion means You create an environment where diverse people can belong and thrive. How do we do that? That happens if every single person tries to have a growth mindset. When all of us try to apply a growth mindset, then we have a higher chance of creating an inclusive environment. Something to remember here is that diversity and inclusion must always go together. Something I learned from my past work is that when we write out diversity and inclusion, it always has to be the ampersand instead of spelling out AND. If you use the ampersand and, that means one cannot exist without the other. One without the other will not lead to true change. But you might be asking, but Elizha, why should I care at work? That's because we get into our last concept of the day, which is psychological safety. What is psychological safety? It is a belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. This was coined by Amy Edmondson in 1999. What we mean by interpersonal risk-taking is we can go into activities where we risk our reputations, where we risk being ridiculed. Why is all this important? It's important because psych safety is one of the most essential elements to building high-performing teams. How do we know this? In 2015, Google came out with a study that they've been doing for years. It was called Project Aristotle. What Google wanted to find out was, what makes my highest performing teams high performing? After they did their studies, they found that it was about psych safety. Yung mga tao sa highest performing teams nila, they were not afraid to make mistakes and to tell their teammates about those mistakes. In the highest performing teams with psych safety, they also have the most innovative and creative ideas because they're not afraid to try new things. We have to have an inclusive environment so that psychological safety can exist. So as we can see, it's not just all about fluff, right? Of course, it's nice to do the right thing. It's great if, as a society, we go for inclusion. But in the workplace, it's not just about that. It's also about high performance. And so psychological safety, it creates the conditions that gives teams a higher chance of high performance.